Today on Newsday.
Crisis management is about how do you respond to the communities you're serving. And so when you think about the impact of policy on telehealth and supporting interoperability, those are things that I do believe transcend how you may feel about who is in office.
My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, where we are dedicated to transforming healthcare one connection at a time. Newsday discusses the breaking news in healthcare with industry experts. Now, let's jump right in. All right, it's Newsday, and this week we are going to have a special episode. This is the Get Out the Vote episode, and it's Sarah, Drex, and I. Is this the first time just the three of us have been on a show?
Except for our attempt at live. Yes.
Oh, that's right. We did live. We did that one episode of live. Anyone who's wondering what happened to live, our schedules are so crazy. We're never in the same space long enough to potentially record the show, which is what happened to that one episode of live. That was as long as it went. A little sad. That's the only time the three of us get on a show together. But you guys have done some Today shows together.
We do. And we've done 2 NFL episodes thus far
Ooh.
as well.
Man, NFL this year is, let's see, Seahawks and 49ers. How are we doing there?
It's not great.
It's not awesome.
Oh, man. But Dodgers, have to love what's going on with
Those
the Dodgers.
Hopefully by the time this airs, it will be a new World Series champion for sure.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even look. Who won that game?
As of today being October 29th, last night they won their 3rd game in a row. So they're going into tonight's game up 3 over the Yankees.
Wow. That's huge. The only sad thing about that is you have the two of the highest payrolls in baseball making the World Series, which tells people you just have to spend more money in order to win the World Series. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. All right. Hey, we're going to try to talk about the election. Our main thing here, we're going to stay out of the hot topic political issues. We're going to talk about this from a health IT perspective and what this means. For the most part, we all agree that voting is so important. And Sarah, you were just talking about all the statistics and things about how important voting is, and I'm sure we will get into that. Regardless of which perspective you have and those kinds of things, by all means, get out and vote tomorrow. In this election, there's a lot of, obviously there's the national campaign, which gets a lot of attention, but gosh, the ballot initiatives are just rolling in. And I don't know about you guys, but when those ballot initiatives roll in, I actually have to go do some studying because you can't get into the booth and try to read all those and figure them out. They're complex.
Yeah, I think for me, Washington State has early voting. And so it gives me the opportunity to sit down with my ballot and do a little searching on each one of the initiatives and understand the pros and the cons and watch videos and the stories that have been on the news and then actually make a decision and vote. But yeah, it would be hard to do in the booth. And there are a ton of initiatives in a lot of states that have been put on the ballot.
California didn't have as much on the ballot this year. It was interesting. And so there were more local initiatives than there were state initiatives. And you really have to dig in, to Drex's point. You have to reread that ballot 3 or 4 times to make sure that you're absorbing all the perspectives and what the longer term implications may be.
Unfortunately, ChatGPT isn't up to date on these things. So I can't say, hey, this is what I think and this is what I believe. How should I vote on these? Because some of these things are, I'm serious to, I read some of them. I'm like, man, who did they get to write this? I'm not sure. I think I agree with this, but I'm not sure if I'm voting for the exact opposite of what I believe. The ballot initiatives are somewhat tricky, but very important. So we're going to stick to topics: security, data privacy, AI, interoperability, and those kinds of things. And then feel free to go from there. Drex, I'm going to start with you in the whole cybersecurity area. This is one of those areas that is never going to be a hot button issue. The people who get elected and the people who are setting the policy around this, it's really important to get this right. And I think is it Warner?
Senator Warner, yeah.
Warner's been the most consistent voice, I think, in this space. What are you looking at with regard to cybersecurity in terms of continuity of direction or whatever as you're looking at this election?
I think as we're looking out to what happens after the election and after the new administration, the new House and the new Senate are seated, I think this idea of from the healthcare perspective, continuing to keep the pressure on around consistency, hygiene. How do we just make ourselves safer by doing the fundamentals? I think there's still a fair amount of disagreement about exactly how that happens. Do we do the CPGs, the cyber performance goals? How do those get incentivized? Are they incentivized? We still have the challenges of the haves and have-nots when it comes to health systems and hospitals and rural access facilities. But we clearly have a lot of work to do. We still have to get safer. We still have to get better at cybersecurity. And in the places where we're the most challenged, those are the places that probably need healthcare the most. When those hospitals go down, often in rural areas, when those hospitals go down, it's 100 miles to get to the next hospital, sometimes more. So a critical injury, a heart attack, whatever the case may be, if your hospital is in commission, you may not make it to the next hospital. So we've really got to figure out how to help those organizations get better and a lot of work to do internally about how that's going to happen.
Is there still like federal funding? Is there an MU, a meaningful use? Is that talk still floating out there in the ether around maybe getting more funds to rural healthcare and that kind of stuff?
There's conversations. There are initiatives that are on the books, obviously, that have not been approved that would provide funding, especially to smaller organizations to help improve their cybersecurity program. Obviously, there are free programs that have been offered by some companies like Google and Microsoft. The challenge with a lot of those, all of those in a lot of ways are the same challenges we found with meaningful use, is that there was money to get on the ride, but there's no money to stay on the ride. So you can buy things, you can get stuff for free, you can implement it and try to use it. Or can you even implement it and try to use it, right? You don't have the resources, you don't have the people, you don't have the skills, you don't have the number of folks you need to be able to run these things. So we are given a lot of money, we're given grant money to get things started, but the sustainability of it becomes a challenge. And I think that's the part we're going to have to look at too. It's great to be able to install new tools and do new and different things to get a cybersecurity program up and running, but keeping it running is a whole different thing. There is no finish line.
Yeah, Sarah, I wanted to talk to you about advocacy because we've had some great 229 project meetings this year. And more I'm hearing these CIOs talk about advocacy. They're talking about not only on the federal level, but on the state level. And we get some funny stories of you think you're going to talk to a senator or a congressman, but you're sitting down with a 22 or 21-year-old recent college graduate, and that's who you're sitting down with. And you're trying to explain to them the complexities of healthcare and the complexities of AI and the complexities of whatever. What do you tell organizations and healthcare leaders about advocacy and how to go about it?
There's a couple things about advocacy that I am really passionate about, and that is having been the advocacy chair for SoCal HIMSS once upon a time. I also had advocacy support when I was in Florida. We went to the Capitol for the Advocacy State Days with HIMSS. Again, going and talking to the legislators who are understanding these major impacts in healthcare. And sometimes we joke about, hey, don't send the 23-year-old MBA to the meeting because they may not understand the nuances of some of the conversations we're having at our events. And yet I was also that person. And if I'm going to be with my senators or my legislators, and I'm a page for them as an example, and I'm 23 out of my MBA program, you want to tell those perspectives to someone like me, because at that age, I wanted to be able to make an impact with what was happening in healthcare. And we always talk about healthcare being local. It still is local. What is happening in your local communities, specific to local, state, and then of course the national level. So if you think about the things that are important to you, and here's the thing, if you're doing advocacy, you're volunteering your time. Make sure it's something you care a lot about. What do I care about? Women's health, aging populations, affordability, equity, and access. 5 things. They all matter. They're all also intertwined. And to Drex's point, if you have a cyber event and a local hospital goes down that's at rural access to the major hospitals, how are people getting to them? And you saw what happened even after these most recent hurricanes, where people are cut off from all support and all capability. And I used to work for HCA, huge advocacy, and the fact that they had 1,000 people take time off to go and help the Asheville community. Yes, they own the healthcare system there, but again, that's not uncommon for the type of effort that they do in other organizations. And so when you work for companies that support your views, that allow you to also be passionate about the things that you're passionate about. All of it comes together and nothing feels like it's extraordinarily a drain on any one aspect of your life. You start to pull all these things together. It's why we do what we do here at This Week Health. We make sure people know about those topics and how to have an impact on them. And we talk about them in Today in Health IT constantly, about equity and access and affordability. And so that's our responsibility, to make sure people know how and where to go find the outlets that are important to them.
Sarah, as you were mentioning that, I recalled that there was, and it will be in our email that goes out tomorrow, HCA Healthcare faces $350 million hit from hurricane disruptions. Disaster recovery and essentially business continuity become really important issues. We just finished the 229 project meeting, and one of the rural healthcare CIOs was there, and he was telling the story of how during the hurricane they were knocked out. And he said, look, I don't care how you design your network. When you only have one carrier coming in, it's one backhoe, it's one whatever, that's it. And he goes, more and more, we're moving things to the cloud. That creates an even more acute problem for them. They want to move to the cloud for the agility and the cost savings, but when they do that, they now set themselves up for a significant challenge. And so somebody said, hey, don't you have a deal with AT&T or Verizon or whatever? They would send the truck in with the essentially to get on satellite and that kind of stuff. They said, yeah, we did. We had that agreement. We had that contract. And when the Verizon truck came in, the city commandeered the truck because they took a higher priority than the hospital. And I'd never thought about that before. But if you're coordinating the entire city's response, it could potentially have a higher impact. And if Verizon only sends one truck because they have to send trucks in 20 different directions, you could end up being cut off. I want to hit on rural healthcare. By the way, we're going to come back to the elephant in the room at some point, but I do want to talk about rural healthcare. The candidates aren't talking about this. And do they need to? One of the things that's interesting to me is, I remember talking to Anish Chopra about this. There's been a continuity across HHS with the laws that have been passed in terms of interoperability, the direction they're going. And you see this, hey, we believe that the medical record should be shared, and we believe that it should be in the patient's hands. And we believe more and more that we are going to be able to do more with data than we ever have before in terms of interoperability. And you direction that doesn't really get set. Maybe it does get set at the presidential level, but it seems to, no matter what the course was, that whole 21st century cures probably is going to set the course in the next couple of years, regardless of who's in office. That was something he talked about a while ago. And I've also seen the various heads of healthcare IT for HHS, Seema Verma, and going all the way back, sit on a panel, and they essentially said the same thing. How will this election impact that, do you think? I'll leave that as an open. Whoever wants to try to answer that one.
I'll just jump in by the perspective of things like interoperability or the ability to reach rural areas. I think specifically, again, when we go back to California, we face a critical shortage of healthcare providers. That leads to initiatives here that expand the physician workforce and incentivizing professionals to serve in these regions, but also investments in telehealth, that we can maintain care during crises. Here, we've got wildfires, we had the pandemic, we also have mudslides and earthquakes and whatever else happens. And those crisis management isn't about politics per se. Crisis management is about how do you respond to the communities you're serving. And so when you think about the impact of policy on telehealth and supporting interoperability, so that if you do have a visit in a rural area that's only being served in some cases by telemedicine physicians, how is that getting back into your core EHR and ability to make decisions? Those are things that I do believe transcend how you may feel about who is in office.
I think one of the bigger things that we're going to face over the next 4 years is, how do we think about and how do we talk about AI and transparency in AI? And the next administration will have, I think, a significant say. Right now, what we have is we have executive orders in place, but the executive order that's in place is really directing the various entities to look at this from a transparency standpoint, from a data use standpoint, and some other things that are really key. But the regulation of AI, the approach to regulating AI technologies in the next couple of years, this is going to be big. And it feels, we saw this in the European Union. They feel like they're getting out ahead of this. Can we get out ahead of this? Do we know where this should go? Drex, I'm curious what your thoughts are around AI over the next couple of years. And is it a federal thing where they're going to be coming down on this, or what do you think it might look like?
Yeah, I guess I'm torn on this one. I think obviously there needs to be some oversight and regulation on something like artificial intelligence. It would be great to figure out how to get ahead of it. One of the things we don't do really well, one of them is we do executive orders, which as soon as the new executive can come in, the new executive comes in, those orders can be overturned or changed. So that's not really long lasting, consistent policy. So when we don't do executive orders, we pass laws. And the problem that we have with passing law is that we don't usually write laws that are created to be very agile over time. And so in a space that is changing as quickly as it is changing today, in just the last 2 years, it's unbelievable how far and how much AI has changed. Trying to get ahead of it by legislating it and then trying to figure out how to make those laws not have unintended consequences. I talk about this a lot, but not have unintended consequences that either retards the deployment of artificial intelligence or the development of artificial intelligence, or just becomes impossible to change or adjust to help manage new risks that we see with artificial intelligence. Those are the challenges that I think the next administration, the next several administrations will face.
Yeah, and it's changed so rapidly. Sarah, what do you say to an entrepreneur?
What do I say to entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley? It's interesting because I'm actually in constant conversation with some of those individuals for all the right reasons. I think about where things like the IEEE UL 2933, that's the comprehensive standard for interoperability, security, and governance in healthcare technology, can be leveraged, both from a cyber insurance perspective, but also to how applications are being developed. And you think about even the contract negotiations with labor unions or nursing associations, they're asking for the security to be included. And I had not thought about application security as part of a CISO or a CIO's responsibility. AI has now introduced that additional level of awareness and need for us. So when you're advising startups, you're having conversations with companies, it used to be like, make sure you have high trust compliance, make sure you're HIPAA compliant, make sure you have these different parameters. Now it's asking for things like IEEE UL 2933. What I love is we have 229ers, Pete Marks, Chuck Podesta, Reed Stephen, who independently meet each quarter to talk about how you advance these practices inside of your facilities, specific to how you can empower a CIO to have the right conversation with the board, as well as with the vendors or the partners that you bring into your organizations. And so we're all learning and growing together. But when you bring these things into the mainstream, then you have to talk about them, because then they become part of the norm. And some of these, we don't necessarily know the unintended consequences that Drex is talking about, but it harkens back to our HIPAA days where just the awareness of the intent made it something that was a neutral conversation and a level of curiosity that everybody got better together.
The elephant in the room is no one's going to vote on those issues we just talked about. At the end of the day, we've gotten to such a polarized political environment that they're going to vote based on other topics. But part of the reason we talk about those things is there have been many times in our history where we've had presidents where people are like, oh, this is the end of the republic as we know it. It's going to end right here. It's going to end. And this goes all the way back to Adams and Jefferson. Oh my gosh, it's a fledgling thing. And they're like, if you let Adams run this thing, it's never going to make it to year number 10. And actually, it used to be worse because there was no filter on the editorials, and people could actually fake being the editorial writer and write an editorial about their opponent and just blister them, not only professionally, but personally, just attack them. And that was back in the early days of our thing. But the reality is we make it through. We make it through no matter which side wins. We do end up, the republic goes on for good or bad. Some things, regardless of who gets elected, some things will move forward, some things will move backwards. It happens over and over again. It depends on your political opinion sometimes, whether you think it's a move forward or back. We've had some good conversations on this. I just want to close this out by saying this is a very difficult time. Vote. That's what we can do. One of the things that we want to see, I think all of us want to see, is civility. One of the things, we're recording this ahead of time, one of the things we are all worried about is a lack of civility post the election. And so my hope coming out of this is, regardless of who you vote for, regardless of who's elected, that we realize that and fundamentally come together as individuals and keep doing our part to tone down the rhetoric. It's to the point now where we can almost barely have conversations about politics without people getting very, very upset. I'll let you guys have the last word. I just took a lot of the words. So Sarah, why don't you go? You can go first.
I was going to say, I want to hear Drex last. The next piece is the most fundamental thing you can ever be is kind. And whatever form that takes for you, regardless of your really beliefs or views, number one, go vote. And throughout all of this, be nice. Be kind to your neighbor. Be kind to all the people who need you for so many reasons that aren't about how you feel about politics, because that level of civility is what makes us human. And I don't want to see us go back to the 1860s fighting over things that we could figure out if we just listened. And there's so much more to the 1860s than that statement. Yet I just got done reading Eric Larson's book about it. And you realize 100 plus, 150 years later, we're fighting about the same things right now in some cases. And that to me is a little bit scary. But again, if we're nice, then it can usurp so many different perspectives.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Drex, last word.
Yeah, I definitely second that. Just a couple of things I think to think about too. Statistically, there are some really good studies that show that people in a presidential election year vote for president, but don't necessarily vote all the way down ballot. They may just mark the presidential ballot and drop it in the box. Do the research on your competitors down ballot all the way down to your city council, and make sure that you make a decision and vote. It's really important. Don't leave those spots blank. Voting means voting the full slate. The other thing I'll say is that there's going to be a lot of misinformation. There has been a lot of misinformation already, artificial intelligence, fake images, fake videos. You're going to continue to see that. Probably after the election for the next few months, you're going to see a ton of that kind of stuff that's going to be created. And a lot of that is created by foreign nationals who are very interested in disrupting our faith in our election process and our faith in our voting process and democratic procedures. Don't let that happen. When you see things and your first reaction to them is that I just can't believe that, then you probably shouldn't believe it. And you probably should look for additional sources before you get really upset, or before you go off and do your own thing on social media. Make sure that you're double checking and that the information that you're seeing is real, because there's a lot of literally fake news out there.
And I just want to say that I think you two are two of the smartest people I know. I respect you today before the election. I'll respect you after the election. And I know that you make decisions based on your experiences, your knowledge. And I hope we can all just do that. Just remind yourself that you love these people before the election, you love them after the election, you respect them for who they are, what they've done, and what they mean to you and your family before the election and after. I'll close with this. I had a conversation with my parents, and I asked them, I'm like, hey, do you know what party, and some of their older friends, do you know what party they were a part of? And they're like, I think they voted Democrat. They might have been Republican. I have no idea. Back when my parents, it was like, they were just our friends, but they voted for who they voted for. And somehow along the way, we've gotten so aligned with our politics that we think we can't talk to somebody who votes a different way. And man, I hope we can, that's the thing I hope we can get past, is civility following. Hey, I want to thank you guys for doing this episode. We were all apprehensive coming into it, and I appreciate you guys doing this.
Always appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Newsday. There's a lot happening in our industry, and while Newsday covers interesting stuff, another way to stay informed is by subscribing to our daily insights email, which delivers expertly curated health IT news straight to your inbox. Sign up at thisweekhealth.com/news. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.